I'm Mike Renner, lead draft analyst here at Pro Football Focus, and it's time to break down the biggest needs heading into the NFL draft for every franchise in the league. Let's kick it off with the AFC East with the New England Patriots. This one is pretty obvious. If you haven't been living under a rock this offseason, you know Tom Brady now with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers no longer a Patriot. That makes the need at quarterback pretty glaring for New England. Yes, they have Jarrett Stidham, last year's fourth-round pick, but he was the sixth quarterback off the board in last year's draft. Not terribly highly coveted in that draft. We just think it's still a position that needs to be addressed. On to the New York Jets, where wide receiver is their biggest need. After losing Robbie Anderson to free agency, they didn't really have a lot of receiving talent to begin with. Losing their best guy, well, it makes it even that more glaring. Someone like Jerry Jeudy of Alabama would look good in the Jets' green. That brings us to the Miami Dolphins, who, yes, they have a lot of different needs on that roster, but I believe quarterback, with the value of it, still a massive, massive need for them with Ryan Fitzpatrick. Probably not the quarterback of the future. Let's see if they go up and get Tua Tagovailoa via trade. They need someone to fill that franchise void left there in Miami. On to the Buffalo Bills, where it's a pretty complete roster, but we think someone across from Jerry Hughes would go a long way for that Bills defense. An edge defender, another pass rusher, lost Shaq Lawson this offseason, just another position to add some pass rush to that very, very talented Bills defense. All right, let's go to the AFC North, where the Pittsburgh Steelers, another fairly complete roster with Ben Roethlisberger coming back, but with Ramon Foster retiring, they have a need on the interior of their offensive line. Not a lot of draft capital to address it. In fact, the least amount of draft capital of any team in the NFL according to our metrics. But offensive line is a position where you can find yourself, and especially on the interior, a starter somewhere on day 2. My favorite fit? Fresno State's Netane Muti. The dude packs a punch, and that's what the Steelers' offensive line has been known for. Now for the Cleveland Browns, the biggest need also along the offensive line, but this one specifically offensive tackle. Yes, they filled the right side with Jack Conklin in free agency, but Greg Robinson, I don't think he's coming back anytime soon to the left side there for Cleveland. They need a left tackle. Good news is they're in a good spot to get him with the 10th overall pick. On to the Baltimore Ravens, where this was a need last year for them, and they still had one of the better defenses in the NFL, but they're in a good position at the back end of the first round to address linebacker this year. For the Ravens defense, they beefed up that defensive line in free agency. They've always attacked their secondary heavily over the past few years. Not necessarily a need. They could still go back to the well there, but the biggest hole on that defense right now is obviously the linebacker position. On to the Cincinnati Bengals, where quarterback, no surprise here, Andy Dalton likely to part ways with the Cincinnati Bengals after being benched last year. And, well, they own the number 1 overall pick, and you can pencil Joe Burrow in to Cincinnati right now. All right, on to the AFC South, where the Tennessee Titans, yes, they got Vic Beasley in free agency, but Vic Beasley earned a 62.3 pass rushing grade last year, and that was his highest since 2016 when he had 16 sacks. So we don't think Vic Beasley going to solve that need for edge defender anytime soon for the Tennessee Titans. Let's move on to the Indianapolis Colts, where wide receiver is a pretty glaring need still for them, even after free agency. They thought Devin Funchess could have been their guy last year, the guy that solved their wide receiver problem. He gets hurt. Barely plays for the Colts this past season. It's obvious how much they need a second fiddle there to T.Y. Hilton. Philip Rivers loves him, some big-bodied contested catch guys. The Indianapolis Colts should be in luck at the top of the second round with some talented receiver falling to them. On to the Houston Texans, where after trading away DeAndre Hopkins, this one seems pretty obvious. Yes, they signed Randall Cobb in free agency. Yes, they still have Will Fuller on the roster. Those guys are not number 1 receivers at this point in their careers. They need that true number 1. Going to be difficult for them to find it in the draft. They might have to look elsewhere to fill that void. On to the last team here in the AFC South, the Jacksonville Jaguars, where they lost A.J. Boye and Jalen Ramsey over the past year. Cornerback went from one of the biggest strengths on that roster to now easily their biggest need. They need any sort of help they can there, and it's not the only hole in that roster, but it's definitely the most glaring at this point. Now to your Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, where they got by with smoke and mirrors at the cornerback position last year, but Bashaud Breeland hit free agency, Kendall Fuller gone to the Washington Redskins. They desperately now need to address the cornerback position there. Now they have the draft capital to do so at the back end of the first round. Look for that pick or their second rounder to be a cornerback with how deep this cornerback class is and where the value lies there towards the back end of the first round. On to the Denver Broncos, where it's no secret they're in the market for a speedy wide receiver to pair up with Courtland Sutton and Drew Lock in that offense. Names like Henry Ruggs, like Jalen Reagor, would make a ton of sense for the Denver Broncos somewhere in the first round. Now to the Las Vegas Raiders, where secondary is a need. Just basically any secondary help will do. Lost Carl Joseph to the Cleveland Browns. Yes, LaMarcus Joyner probably slides back to his natural safety position, so that means slot cornerback, outside cornerback. Well, they could use any of it at this point. They're in a position that with the 12th overall pick and the 19th overall pick where they can address that and probably wide receiver as well. On to the Los Angeles Chargers, who lost their left tackle Russell Okung via trade, got Try Turner there to go on the interior. Brian Bulaga is now on the right side for them, but left tackle still seems like a pretty glaring hole on the roster. Don't really have a name you'd feel comfortable about protecting the blind side of whoever is behind center. Let's kick it over to the NFC, where the Green Bay Packers, Aaron Rodgers needs himself a second fiddle to Davante Adams. Some speed, some dynamism in that receiving core. Desperately need because they just did not give Aaron Rodgers any help outside of Davante Adams last year for the Packers offense, and it showed down the stretch. Now to Minnesota Vikings, where cornerback all of a sudden became a glaring need for them overnight. Lost Trey Waynes in free agency, cut Xavier Rhodes, who had a massive downturn in his grading this past season, the past 2 seasons actually. So the Minnesota Vikings cornerback have Mike Hughes on the roster. Still need likely 2 cornerbacks in the draft with how bereft of talent that cornerback room is at the moment. Let's kick it to the Chicago Bears, where they lost safety HaHa Clinton-Dix, cut cornerback Prince Amukamara. They need help at both those positions now. Not in a great position to address cornerback or safety in this draft with their first pick coming in the second round, but I think there will at least be some value, at least at corner, available by the time they're on the clock. On to the Detroit Lions, where they lost Rick Wagner, lost Graham Glasgow over the course of this offseason. Offensive line, one of the strengths of their team last year, now took a big step back. They can't afford to have that continue. Now, at the top of the draft, top 5, maybe Jeffrey Okudah makes more sense for them, but you get into the second, third round, I think that's when you're going to see the Detroit Lions start to address their offensive line. Now on to the Philadelphia Eagles, where they actually have a handful of needs now. After being one of the more complete rosters in the NFL last year, things started to fall apart, and especially at the wide receiver position with injuries. Now they get Deshaun Jackson back. They have J.J. Arcega-Whiteside going into year 2, but I still think adding a dynamic receiver, a playmaker to that wide receiving core would go a long way for quarterback Carson Wentz. On to the Dallas Cowboys, where Byron Jones is gone, no longer locking down that right cornerback spot. You have Chidobe Awuzie, you have Jordan Lewis, who's probably going to stick in the slot. Now you need that other cornerback to slot in across from those 2 guys. Someone like a C.J. Henderson or a Christian Fulton would make a lot of sense for the Cowboys in the first round. Now it's time to kick to the New York Giants, where they need an edge defender. They need pass rushing help. They've taken some swings in the mid-rounds in recent years. Lorenzo Carter, O'Shane Zimenez, neither have really been hits. For mid-rounds is not necessarily where you want to be attacking the edge position. Not a lot of high-end talent goes in those middle rounds, but they're also not in a great position with the 4th overall pick to address it either. So this just might not be the draft where they come away with their edge defender. Now the Washington Redskins, who own the number 2 overall pick, they need themselves a cornerback. Traded away Quentin Dunbar because he wasn't a scheme fit. Cut Josh Norman because, Well, he wasn't playing good. Signed Kendall Fuller, yes, but he's been more of a slot cornerback or safety over the course of his career, so they need to address the outside cornerback position there. They've kind of been penciled into Chase Young there in the first round, but if we go to the middle rounds, third, fourth, that's when you could see them addressing the cornerback position. Now on to the NFC South, where the New Orleans Saints, they are in need of a linebacker. They have Demario Davis there set in stone as their preeminent starter in that linebacking core, but Kiko Alonso, Alex Anzalone, these aren't quality other options. A pretty complete roster there, but adding another talented linebacker to that group would go a long way. Next up is the Atlanta Falcons, where cornerback all of a sudden became a massive, massive glaring need. They cut Desmond Trufant because of slipping play and his inflated cap number, but all they have left at the position, Isaiah Oliver, Kendall Sheffield, Jordan Miller, not really inspiring a ton of confidence for me in that cornerback group. Let's go to Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where offensive tackle is their biggest need, specifically right tackle, where yes, they signed Joe Haeg, but he was a backup over the course of his career with the Colts. When he did start, things got ugly, almost 100 pressures in 2 years as a starter for them. With those deep drops in Tampa, they need to protect Tom Brady. I fully expect that first-round pick to be used on one of the tackles in this draft class, seeing as how deep it is. On to the last team in the NFC South here, the Carolina Panthers, where they got a lot of needs defensively at this point. Need a complete retooling of that defense. Cornerback, though, looks like their biggest need after they lost James Bradbury. Can also throw in linebacker in this mix as well after losing Luke Kuechly. I think Isaiah Simmons ultimately, value-wise, makes the most sense for them if he is sitting on the board there with the 7th overall pick. Out of the Seattle Seahawks, where offensive line, once again, broken record here for Seahawks fans. Looks like their biggest need. No right tackle on the roster anymore with Jermaine Ifedi gone, with George Fant gone. While they've thrown some resources at it over the course of the offseason in terms of Cedric Ugbohi and Brandon Shell in free agency, I don't think that's going to be solving the problem anytime soon. They might want more of a long-term fix at the position. Could add a few needs defensively, cornerback, defensive end to this roster, but as it stands at the moment, offensive tackle looks like their biggest need. Let's get to the NFC champs from a season ago. The San Francisco 49ers lost Emmanuel Sanders after trading for a midseason. Dante Pettis still hasn't put it all together despite showing the talent there going into year 3. They have Marquise Goodwin coming back from injury. They have Jalen Hurd, but getting that complete wide receiver across from Deebo Samuel could go a long way for this 49ers team and Jimmy Garoppolo in that 49ers offense. Let's go to the Los Angeles Rams, where, no surprise here, their offensive line took a massive, massive step back last season. A big win for them, getting Andrew Whitworth to re-sign, but pretty much any other position along that interior of the offensive line could be addressed with how poor they were last season. No first-rounder here, but again, interior offensive line, you can find yourself a starter somewhere on day 2. Last team now, the Arizona Cardinals, where, again, offensive line, common theme here in the NFC West. They need a right tackle, and they need one badly. The good news is Tristan Wirfs, Jedrick Wills, both played right tackle in college, both freakishly athletic, both look they'd be perfect fits for the Arizona Cardinals and Cliff Kingsbury's scheme there. They're in luck with the top of the first round. Expect one of them to be the pick for the Arizona Cardinals. There you have it. There are your 32 team needs. Make sure to hit subscribe, make sure to hit like, and go to the PFF YouTube channel to check out all our other videos.
You want to get rid of me and get back to more great PFF YouTube content? All you have to do is push that button right there and subscribe. Thanks for watching.